up every day, so I can't control, coach.
After nearly 2 years away from the media spotlight, Deshaun Watson finally stepped in front of the cameras and addressed reporters. On the surface, his comments were measured, composed, and professional. But if you read between the lines, there was a much bigger story unfolding. Because while Watson spoke about staying patient and waiting for his moment, Shedeur Sanders was already taking valuable first-team reps that once belonged to a quarterback carrying a massive $230 million price tag. In today's breakdown, we're taking a closer look at what may really be happening behind closed doors in Cleveland. Why many people around the organization are starting to believe the dynamics inside the quarterback room have already changed. And why this could be the strongest indication yet that the Browns are quietly setting the stage for a new era at the most important position on the team.
Past, I can't look in the rearview mirror. Obviously, those situations, you have those experiences, but at the same time.
Deshaun Watson finally stepped in front of reporters for the first time since suffering the Achilles injury that abruptly ended his season. For many Browns fans, that injury didn't just end a year. It may have ended any remaining belief that Watson would automatically reclaim the starting job moving forward. Let that sink in for a moment. We're talking about a player who has remained largely silent in public for nearly 2 full years. No major press conferences, no detailed updates, just occasional rehab reports coming from the organization, and non-stop speculation about whether he could ever return to the player he once was. So when Watson finally took a seat in front of the cameras, everyone knew the questions would be direct and uncomfortable, and that's exactly what happened. This time around, the spotlight wasn't on his mechanics, his mobility, or even how close he is to returning physically. Instead, the conversation kept circling back to Shedeur Sanders. Again and again, reporters approached the topic from different angles, trying to gauge how Watson felt about competing with a young quarterback for the position that has been his since arriving in Cleveland. To his credit, Watson didn't run from the discussion. He emphasized that the decision belongs to coach Todd Monken and made it clear he wasn't interested in turning the competition into a public battle or creating unnecessary drama. He spoke about staying prepared, continuing to work, trusting the process, and being ready whenever his opportunity arrives. On the surface, that's exactly what you'd expect from an experienced veteran handling a difficult situation professionally. Nothing explosive, nothing that would dominate headlines by itself. But here's where things get interesting. Watson made those comments on the same day Shedeur Sanders was taking first-team reps in practice, while Watson worked in a more restricted role away from the spotlight. So when he talks about waiting for his opportunity, that doesn't sound like a generic football cliché anymore. It sounds like someone who understands he's currently watching from the outside while another quarterback gets the opportunities that normally belong to the face of the franchise. And for a player who has carried that title since arriving in Cleveland, a player the organization invested in with one of the richest contracts the league has ever seen, that's a dramatic change in the conversation. Think back to how Watson handled situations in the past. Even during difficult stretches, he always projected confidence as the unquestioned leader. Now, whether he says it directly or not, he sounds like someone who realizes the landscape around him has changed. Maybe the most revealing part wasn't frustration or anger. Instead, Watson sounded like a player who already recognizes where things are headed and has chosen to embrace that reality publicly before the situation forces the issue. And trust me, this is where the story takes another turn. Just days before Watson addressed the media, Browns general manager Andrew Berry appeared on Cleveland sports radio and delivered some very telling comments about Shedeur Sanders. Berry openly discussed Sanders' progress from the early months of the year through OTAs and minicamp, and his praise was impossible to ignore. He described Sanders' development as phenomenal, not promising, not encouraging, phenomenal. He highlighted how much growth Sanders has shown while adjusting to a new offensive system, a new environment, and a role that had to be earned rather than simply handed to him. Then Berry pushed the praise even further. He explained that the organization is genuinely eager to see how Sanders performs once the action becomes more physical during padded practices, preseason matchups, and live game-like situations. Those are the moments that separate quarterbacks who merely impress during spring workouts from the players who are capable of becoming true starters.
And then certainly as we got into having, real practices in May, his growth has been tremendous. So we're all very excited to see Shedeur's, fall camp, preseason, things of that nature. When we get into padded situations, live situations, less scripted.
Take a moment and think about who those comments are coming from. Andrew Berry isn't just another executive in the building. He's the architect of this roster. He's also the person who approved Watson's massive contract and has spent years defending that decision in public. So when Berry goes on local radio and talks about Sanders' next big test being padded practices while sounding that excited about it, that's not simply a general manager complimenting a young player. That's a general manager signaling where things could be headed. And if Sanders continues showing the same level of progress in full contact situations that he's displayed throughout spring workouts, it becomes increasingly difficult to picture Todd Monken keeping him on the sidelines, no matter how Watson's recovery unfolds. To be fair, Berry never officially crowned Sanders as the future starter. He didn't hand him the job. He didn't declare Watson finished. But pay close attention to the way he delivered those comments, the tone, the wording, and the enthusiasm behind every answer. It sounds an awful lot like a front office slowly preparing fans for a transition at quarterback, even if nobody inside the organization wants to be the first person to say it publicly. And if Sanders eventually takes control of this position, many around the NFL will argue that he earned every bit of it, especially considering everything he had to overcome just to reach this point. Because if you think back to last season, Shedeur Sanders seemed to face criticism from every direction. Before he had even taken a meaningful regular season snap, many people had already formed opinions about him. Every small mistake during practice suddenly became a major talking point. Every confident statement, every bit of swagger that other young quarterbacks are often celebrated for, was turned into a debate about his personality. That's what made the scrutiny around him so different. Instead of focusing solely on football, people were constantly creating narratives around his attitude. And for a young quarterback trying to establish himself, that's a challenge that can quickly become exhausting. Yet despite all the noise surrounding him, Sanders kept moving forward. He continued working, continued developing, and slowly started changing the conversation through his performance rather than his words. That's why this current moment feels so significant, because the same player many critics doubted not long ago is now forcing an entire organization to seriously consider its future at the most important position on the field.
This kid talks, he runs his mouth like I could be a starting quarterback with his arms crossed like this. Get your ass in the front row and study and do all that. If I know, the whole league knows.
When injuries became part of the story, Sanders didn't receive the same patience and understanding that established veterans usually get. Instead, critics immediately questioned everything from his toughness to his commitment, creating even more doubt around a young player still trying to find his footing. And when he finally earned his first career start, a moment that should have been celebrated as a major milestone, the reaction from some corners of the media was surprisingly dismissive. Rather than focusing on his development as an NFL quarterback, certain analysts treated the moment like a spectacle. The conversation quickly shifted away from football and toward narratives that had little to do with what he was actually doing on the field. Some portrayed him as a headline-generating attraction instead of a serious quarterback working to build his career. That's what made the situation so frustrating for many of his supporters. No matter what Sanders did, it often felt like the criticism arrived before the performance was even evaluated. Yet through all of that noise, he kept showing up, kept improving, and kept giving the organization reasons to believe. And now, looking at where things stand today, you have to wonder if all of those early doubts are starting to backfire on the people who rushed to write him off.
Because he's got a sore arm.
Okay, so you're using that as a negative against the kid?
I don't understand.
Jesus, God, would you give him a chance?
Well,
My God,
here's the
because his
thing.
arm's sore?
Yeah.
What, that's a negative? That the kid's got a sore arm?
Yes!
Because he's working too hard? The hell out.
Working again.
But here's what has completely changed over the last year. Instead of responding to the criticism, Sanders has allowed his performance to speak louder than any headline ever could. Reports coming out of the Browns' practice facility describe a quarterback who has developed genuine chemistry within the offense, consistently linking up with young targets like Denzel Boston and tight end Harold Fannin Jr., two players who are also working to establish themselves at the NFL level. Beyond the stat sheets and practice highlights, Sanders has also earned something even more important: respect from teammates throughout the locker room, including several offensive players who have openly expressed confidence in his future. And that's a bigger deal than some people realize. Locker room support is one of the few things in professional sports that can't be faked. You can't create it through media appearances, social media posts, or carefully rehearsed interviews. Either your teammates believe in you or they don't. Now, the criticism hasn't vanished completely. There are still skeptics out there. There are still people waiting for a bad day so they can rush online and say, "I told you this guy wasn't the answer." But the conversation surrounding Sanders has undeniably changed. Not long ago, people were asking, is this guy a bust? Now the question being asked is this guy about to become the starting quarterback? That's an incredible turnaround from where things stood just a year ago, and it didn't happen by chance. It happened through hard work, through repeated opportunities, through performance under pressure, and through the kind of steady consistency that eventually forces even the loudest critics to quiet down. So where exactly does that leave Deshaun Watson? That's the question hanging over this entire situation, because if Sanders continues building on this momentum throughout training camp and carries it into preseason action, Todd Monken's decision may not end up being controversial at all. It could simply become the obvious choice, the kind of decision that months later everyone claims they saw coming from the beginning. Training camp is going to reveal everything. Will Deshaun Watson battle his way back into the QB1 conversation and remind everyone why the organization invested so heavily in him? Or is this competition already moving towards Shedeur Sanders becoming the next leader of this offense in Cleveland? Let me know your prediction in the comments below, and if you enjoy Browns coverage like this, make sure you're subscribed, because this quarterback battle is only getting more intense, and trust me, the biggest developments may still be ahead.